Based on the novel by Terry Southern and Mason Hoffenberg, Candy was a bold cinematic attempt to blend surreal humor, sexual satire, and a commentary on American pop culture. The film was a product of the time, deeply influenced by the counterculture movement, the loosening of censorship, and a growing hunger for outrageous comedy. Some found it scandalous, others found it groundbreaking, but almost everyone agreed that Candy was unlike anything else playing at the local theater, and over 50 years later, it still has a cult following among those who appreciate its wacky, irreverent style. Now, let's dive into 30 behind-the-scenes stories that shine a light on why Candy is more than just a strange relic of the 1960s. 1. Brando improvised wildly. During the shooting of Candy, Marlon Brando reportedly showed up knowing almost nothing of his lines. He'd skim the script, pick a moment that caught his eye, and then improvise around it. This unorthodox approach sent waves of both excitement and anxiety through the crew. Some days, they'd watch Brando rewrite entire exchanges on the spot, leaving co-stars wide-eyed. But ironically, those ad-libbed bits ended up among the film's most memorable moments. People on set found it thrilling to witness one of Hollywood's great actors in pure freeform mode, even if it delayed filming more than once. 2. Banned for sex content, Candy was initially banned in certain countries because of its sexual content. The film's producers had to scramble, cutting or toning down scenes to appease local censors. This scramble led to multiple international versions of the movie, each with slightly different edits. At the time, it was a risk. Every cut might lose some comedic edge, but it was the only way to ensure broader distribution. Decades later, fans still debate which version best captures Candy's wild essence. 3. Ewa was a teen. The film's lead, Ewa Owlin, was only a teenager. She had this fresh-faced innocence that perfectly fit the role of Candy, a naive young woman entangled in absurd, sexually charged escapades. For Owlin, it was a whirlwind introduction to a side of filmmaking that was anything but ordinary. Some crew members worried about how she'd handle the adult themes, but she reportedly took it in stride, maintaining a polite curiosity about the chaos swirling around her. Her wide-eyed look on screen was at times genuine, as so many scenes were new territory for her. 4. Ringo went full cartoon. Ringo Starr stepped in as a Mexican gardener named Emmanuel, complete with a thick mustache and a cartoonish accent. It was quite a jump for him. Fans were used to seeing Ringo as the laid-back Beatle, not a comedic cameo in a racy satire. On set, he let loose, frequently improvising lines or comedic gestures, prompting the director to extend his screen time in certain scenes. Whenever Ringo walked on set in full gardener mode, people would smirk, partly because it felt surreal to see a beloved musician hamming it up with such a silly persona. Fifth director lost control. The director, Christian Marquand, was a French actor turned filmmaker, known for his flair for eccentric storytelling. But Hollywood's system was different from what he was used to. Some folks behind the scenes claimed Marquand struggled to assert his vision when big-name actors like Brando or Richard Burton demanded changes. Others said he was game for the film's spontaneous nature, letting the cast experiment. Either way, the set often felt like a tug-of-war between planned scenes and last-minute rewrites. This tension occasionally produced comedic gold, but also left the crew scrambling for direction. 6. Southern pushed limits. Terry Southern, co-author of the novel Candy, was no stranger to controversy, having penned Dr. Strangelove and Easy Rider. He hovered around the production, offering ideas, sometimes clashing with Marquand, about how faithful to remain to the original text. Southern envisioned an even wackier, more explicit film. The producers worried that straying too far into risqué territory would repel audiences and censors. So Candy ended up as a sort of balancing act, sexy enough to be provocative, but reined in just enough to avoid outright bans, at least in some places. Seventh set was pure chaos. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was often playful to the point of chaos. One production assistant joked that every day felt like a new puzzle to solve. Scenes got reshuffled, costumes arrived late, props were either missing or mislabeled, and the cast would just roll with it. Some nights, the film crew gathered for impromptu parties that blurred the lines between on-camera goofiness and real-life revelry. In many ways, the spontaneity matched the film's rebellious, free-spirited theme. 8. Astin doubled up John Astin, famous as Gomez Addams on The Addams Family, played multiple roles here, including Candy's father and a lecherous uncle. He had to slip in and out of characters so quickly that the crew gave him the nickname Mr. Double Duty. Astin found the comedic potential delightful, later saying it was some of the zaniest fun he ever had on a film set. He'd wrap a scene as the father, then 5 minutes later reappear in a new costume, carrying himself completely differently. This comedic multi-identity became an insider joke among the cast and crew. 9. Brando shocked in robes. The cameo that truly floored everyone was Marlon Brando's role as the guru. He arrived on location sporting blonde hair and flowing robes that screamed mystical. Then he improvised entire monologues about spiritual enlightenment. The crew watched, half in awe, half in confusion, as Brando recited lines that weren't in any script draft. Christian Marquand, in a mix of admiration and exasperation, tried to guide him, but mostly ended up letting Brando do his thing. The result is a cameo that feels unhinged and inspired all at once. 10th Slap was unscripted. Brando's improvisation famously included a moment where he gently taps Candy's face, unscripted. Iwa Owlin's startled reaction was genuine. She later recalled thinking, "Is this part of the scene, or is Brando messing with me?" But because it perfectly captured Candy's innocence, they kept it. Moments like that are why some call Candy a happy accident of a film, where the best bits arose from spontaneity rather than planning. 11. Burton stayed in character. Richard Burton also made a cameo, playing Mephisto, a drunken poet who stumbles around quoting lines of verse. According to the crew, Burton stayed in that wobbly persona off-camera, too. He'd walk around set, reciting random poetry, glass in hand, thoroughly entertaining everyone. Co-stars found it endearing, if a bit surreal, since they couldn't always tell where Richard Burton ended and Mephisto began. 12. Coburn was confused. James Coburn popped up as Dr. Crankheit, a brain surgeon with bizarre methods. Coburn admitted he never quite grasped the entire storyline, but he joined on the strength of Terry Southern's reputation and the promise of comedic madness. He once joked that if he understood even half his lines' meaning, he might have tried to revise them, but as it was, he found it best just to commit wholeheartedly, confusion and all. 13th. Foreign crew, lost cast. Filming took place in parts of Italy and Spain, a choice that gave Candy a quirky European flair, but it also meant constant logistical snags. Half the crew spoke English, the other half spoke only Italian or Spanish, so translators ran around frantically. On top of that, the Mediterranean sun or unexpected location changes caused scheduling nightmares. More than once, a day's shoot was scrapped because the set wasn't ready or the cast got lost en route. For some, it turned into a comedic adventure in itself. 14. Scripts changed daily. The production schedule was as changeable as the weather. Actors arrived each morning, never fully sure what scenes they'd film. Overnight, a writer might scribble new lines or comedic gags on scraps of paper, handing them out as the cameras rolled. This left Ewa Owlin in the dark about her next wacky encounter. She took it in stride, though, calling it the strangest acting class imaginable. 15. Costumes got crazier. The costume designer had a field day. Candy's outfits were pastel confections, sometimes so whimsical they resembled children's party dresses, emphasizing her naive aura. Meanwhile, as Brando's guru scenes escalated, his robes became flashier, and Ringo Starr's gardener outfit grew more cartoonish, with bigger hats or extra adornments. Crew members said it felt like a surreal fashion show. The constant color changes played into the film's playful, psychedelic vibe. 16th. Police visited the set. Some of the steamier moments on set led to genuine tension. One afternoon, local officials arrived, concerned about the moral boundaries being pushed. The producers had to demonstrate that no laws were violated, that it was comedic farce, not pornography. They eventually talked the authorities down, but it underscored how Candy walked a tightrope. Too mild, and it wouldn't stand out. Too explicit, and it risked bans. The final film tries to straddle that line with mixed results. 17th. Sets felt like cartoons. Set designs were equally surreal. Whether it was a giant garbage dump or a dreamlike medical lab, each location felt slightly cartoonish. Crew members scattered bright, absurd props around, from oversized syringes to outlandish sculptures. The idea was to mimic the novel's offbeat, satirical tone. Actors found it both amusing and disorienting. Sometimes stepping onto a set felt like wandering into a fever dream. 18. Music was psychedelic. The score was composed by Dave Grusin, who blended whimsical tunes with jazzy, psychedelic undertones. The music soared from breezy innocence to jarring weirdness, reflecting Candy's journey from naive sweetheart to hapless wanderer in a sex-crazed wonderland. Some viewers adored this off-kilter soundtrack. Others felt it heightened the sense of confusion. Regardless, it remains a key ingredient in giving Candy its comedic, kaleidoscopic feel. 19th Brando versus Ringo tips. There's a story that Ringo Starr and Marlon Brando once argued over comedic timing. Rumor says Ringo asked Brando for a tip on making comedic moments pop. Brando allegedly told him to listen to the camera, which Ringo found cryptic, but later interpreted as reading the rhythm of the scene. Starr publicly downplayed the tale, calling it a friendly conversation, not an argument. But the legend persists that these two icons briefly sparred over whose comedic instincts would shape the scene more. 20. More sex scenes cut. Terry Southern wanted the film to push even further with more graphic sexual humor. The producer, though, worried about how mainstream audiences would react. Scenes were trimmed, toned down, or cut altogether. Some on set felt the film lost some daring edge in the process. Others believed it was the only reason the movie got distributed at all. As it stands, Candy still tested the limits of late 60s permissiveness, to the point where some critics called it gratuitous. 21. Huston played it straight. Legendary director John Huston popped in for a cameo as a Surgeon General. He performed with total seriousness, never winking at the camera. This approach only amplified the absurdity around him, making the cameo a standout comedic moment. People on set said Huston strolled in, did his lines in a single take, then left to continue a separate project. That level of professionalism contrasted with the rest of the production's looseness, giving it an odd comedic tension. 22nd. Critics trashed it. When Candy premiered, many critics were not kind. They labeled it disjointed, self-indulgent, and at times incoherent. Some even called it tasteless, citing random plot lines and the sheer number of cameo stars as unnecessary clutter. Others championed its brash originality, praising the movie for mocking polite society. The polarized reviews made it a hot topic, and people flocked to see for themselves whether it was comedic genius or a messy dud. 23rd. Europe loved it. Europe, especially in more liberal circles, welcomed Candy more warmly. Midnight screenings popped up, drawing curious crowds eager for risqué, mind-bending entertainment. The film's cartoonish approach to sexuality struck some Europeans as more playful than offensive. In certain cities, it became a cult midnight movie, with fans showing up in outlandish costumes or quoting lines from The Guru and Mephisto. 24. Bloopers stayed in a few comedic gags, came straight from behind-the-scenes slip-ups. Once, a large cardboard pillar toppled during filming, nearly hitting Ewa Aulin. Instead of cutting, the director motioned for them to continue, and the cast turned it into a comedic moment where Candy escapes danger by dumb luck. This unplanned spontaneity aligned with the overall vibe of the film, that everything is on the verge of collapse, but it's all in fun. 25th. Ewa got typecast Ewa Aulin has spoken about the internal conflict she felt playing Candy. On one hand, it launched her into the public eye. On the other, it locked her into the sex kitten stereotype she never asked for. She tried pivoting to more serious roles, but Hollywood, always quick to typecast, struggled to see her differently. Eventually, Aulin drifted back to Europe, choosing smaller, calmer projects. She remains proud of Candy for its bravery, but acknowledges it overshadowed her range as an actress. 26. Brando's last day on set was famously crazy. He arrived in flamboyant robes, insisted on adding an unscripted monologue about achieving spiritual enlightenment, and sat cross-legged on a cushion for half the scene. People froze, unsure if they should cut. Christian Marquand decided to let the camera roll. That footage, while bizarre, ended up in the final cut, capturing the eccentricities that define Candy. 27. Marketing teased scandal. The marketing leaned hard on controversy, hinting that viewers would witness a wild psychedelic experience. Posters showcased swirling colors and provocative taglines like, "Good grief, it's Candy." They teased potential viewers with the idea that this film broke taboos. Some theaters displayed disclaimers about mature content, hoping to attract the counterculture crowd. The strategy worked. Lines formed, especially among young adults hungry for something rebellious. 28th. Deleted scenes rumored. Originally, the film was longer, featuring extended comedic tangents from Brando, Ringo, and others. The producers eventually trimmed it, trying to maintain a brisker pace. Hardcore fans still dream of discovering that lost footage, potentially preserving extra scenes of Brando's improvisations or Ringo's comedic stunts. Rumors swirl that uncut reels might be stashed in some studio vault, but no official confirmation exists. 29. Critics softened later over the years. Critics have reassessed Candy. Some now call it a time capsule from the late 60s, capturing the shift in moral attitudes and the experimental spirit of filmmaking. True, it can feel scattershot or downright nonsensical, but that chaos can also be oddly charming. Others remain unimpressed, seeing it as an empty shock piece. For them, Candy is more about star cameos than actual substance. 30. Cast called it madness. Many cast members look back on filming Candy as a unique, unrepeatable experience. They recall an atmosphere of laughter, improvisation, and pure unpredictability, which they say rarely happens on safer, more corporate productions. For them, the madness was worth it, forging stories and friendships they still cherish. Richard Burton joked years later that Candy was the strangest film he'd ever done, but he never regretted it because it reminded him that comedy can stretch boundaries, and sometimes you need a little anarchy in art. Candy shows us that behind every polished Hollywood film can be a messy swirl of big personalities, cultural shifts, and spur-of-the-moment choices. And sometimes, from that mess, a peculiar gem emerges, one that, decades later, still makes us smile or shake our heads in wonder. Maybe that's the real fun of it all. Discovering that even when a movie doesn't quite fit the norm, it can still leave a bright, bizarre mark on film history.